This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book
And then see the movie.
I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week, we discuss the end of the first novel and the first season of the TV series Game of Thrones.
This is the end of our month of Game of Thrones, our month of Thrones, if you will. This is our fourth episode, and we've been doing it in kind of a weird way, at least unusual for us, and bouncing back and forth between book and film, or book and TV series, I should say, and then covering some of the similar ground in the episodes as we go. What have you thought of the way we've been doing this, James? How's it striking you?
Well, first off, it's weird that we're ending our coverage when I feel like this has been the appetizer and it's ramping up for me because I'm getting so Game of Thrones ready for the end of the show.
Yeah.
I've liked how we covered it, though. Having them both at the exact same time, like having the events of the book the exact same time as the events of the show is something I've never done before. I've never been currently reading the book and then stop and then watch a couple episodes. So I think it's a new experience, which is tough to do for this material because we've both been through it so many times.
Yeah.
And I actually, this week, my instinct was to start reading and then go watch the show, but I started the reading and then was like, you know what, I'm gonna watch the show. So I watched basically all of the show and then went back to finish up my reading.
Nice. So that might have, I'll be interested to know how that may have changed your perspective on some things. But before we really get into it, we wanted to announce that our next project is going to be Pet Sematary by Stephen King. Favorite of the podcast, we've covered It Now and The Shining. And we're going to be getting back into it again when It Part 2 comes out later this year. So we got lots of King ahead of us, which I'm sure will continue on since there's like a renaissance of his movies right now being made. Early returns right now are that this is like a great adaptation, and I've never read it before. So, and I don't really remember the movie that well. So I'm really excited to cover it because I feel like I'm coming into it really fresh, and I'm glad that the early returns on this movie look like it's going to be really good. So I'm excited for it, and I hope you guys will all join us for that.
Yeah, I can't wait. It's one that I think that we've had on the books for a long time, so to see it finally coming out and to see that everybody's excited for it like we are, it's gonna be a good time. And it's been a little while since we've seen something that was currently in theaters.
Yeah, it'll be cool to do that. But let's get into Game of Thrones, man. So I am so excited because this is like we talked about in the first episode here. This is one of my favorite series of all time. Very important to me. And, you know, I was getting a little bit nostalgic and I don't know what the word is, but like thinking about how this might be the final Game of Thrones episode we make, because there's no telling if we're going to come back and do season 2. I mean, we might if it's very popular, but right now that's not like a concrete plan. So this might be the end of our Game of Thrones coverage. Because
of how much I love the series, I feel like it would be a disservice for us not to go back. But yeah, it's a huge undertaking. So if it's like it's going to take a month for us to cover another season of the show and one of the books
minimum.
So yeah, I hope that it's not the last time we're in Westeros on the podcast, but that's definitely a bittersweet idea there.
Well, just to help it go down, I've brought something along here. I don't know if you can see it in the camera.
I can tell that it's a Game of Thrones beer, right?
It is an Ommegang Game of Thrones Three-Eyed Raven Dark Saison Ale.
Nice.
So I bought this when I first moved to Oregon. I think like shortly thereafter. So it's been like in a number of fridges, just moving around for years. For a while, I forgot about it, and that was why I didn't drink it. And then it became a thing where it was like I'd had it so long that it was like I can't just drink it for anything now. It has to be for something. I figured this is the perfect time, right? Like we're winding up our coverage here, so I'm gonna open it, see if you guys can hear it on the mic. It's one of those that has like a cork in it. Let's see if we can hear it. Yeah.
For the listener, the bottle exploded and there's beer everywhere.
I don't know if that's a good sound or a bad sound on a mic, but here's the pour. All right. On the bottle it says, "From the darkness I watch you, all of your lives, with 1,000 eyes and one, abiding in the shadows of this dark saison lie beguiling and entrancing aromas and flavors. Girded by crisp, lasting herbal hop notes and a yeasty, spicy finish." I would totally share this with you. I wish I could pour you a glass, man, but you're all the way in Florida, so I can't.
Put it in the mail.
It's only 1:00 here, but whatever. Cheers.
Cheers. I remember when they first started doing those beers, I was so excited, and I went and got the Fire and Blood one that has like peppers in it, like chili peppers or something, brewed with chili peppers.
Ooh, that's really interesting. Anyway, so that's enough, shitting around here. Shitting around, I don't know what that means. But yeah, we should probably get into it, man. We're going to go episode by episode, I think, again, and do a little description of it, a little short summary, and then kind of react to everything that happened and talk about some comparisons to the book.
Cool. I'll start us off. The first episode in this last bit is episode 7, You Win or You Die. In King's Landing, Ned tells Cersei he knows all of her children are Jaime's. They soon learn that Robert has been critically wounded by a boar while hunting. A dying Robert names Ned as the protector of the realm to rule until Joffrey reaches the legal age. Ned sends a message to Stannis, Robert's brother, intending to enthrone him since Robert has no legal heirs. Ned tells Littlefinger about his plan and asks him to gain the loyalty of the City Watch, the only force capable of overpowering Lannister forces loyal to Cersei. After Robert's death, Ned, Littlefinger, and the City Watch confront Cersei and Joffrey in the throne room, where Littlefinger and the City Watch betray Ned and attack his men. At the Wall, Ned's younger brother Benjen goes missing during a mission to the north. Jon Snow and Samwell Tarly are picked as stewards, with Jon assigned to Lord Commander Mormont. The stewards swear their loyalties to the Night's Watch. In Essos, Robert's assassin is captured before he can poison Daenerys. Drogo vows to conquer the Seven Kingdoms and give that realm to his son. He starts marching towards Westeros.
These last few episodes, there's like so many iconic, just awesome scenes in it. And this is just getting me excited for what's to come. But there's some really, really standout things here. I think Momoa performing it's really basically right out of the book. His speech, but in the book he's just saying it to Dany, I believe, and here he's like saying it to everybody, and he's just like really intense. And man, is that a cool scene! He throws the torch into the fire. He kills it here, and it also just underlines how good Martin is at writing epic sounding lines, because it sounds so fucking good and it sounds so cool, and it's also scary because he's just like how intense he is. I don't know. It's a great scene to just hit on one random one out of the blue, but yeah, that one really stood out to me.
I had in my notes that I don't think anybody could have played Drogo like Jason Momoa. He is absolutely so intense. You can really feel like he bought into that character and made it his own in a way. Say what you will about DC stuff and the Aquaman film that came out, which actually I still haven't seen.
I'm surprised. You're the comic book guy.
It's one that I just missed in theaters, and I'll be watching it very soon, I'm sure. But I like Momoa for the role. Yeah. I just didn't love him in Justice League, so I hope that film's a little better. But I think that he's a force. Like he's an actor who brings definitely a certain intensity and physicality to each role, and you can definitely see why he was cast as Drogo, because he pulls it off 100%.
Yeah, and I think it did a lot for his career too, because I think Hollywood noticed how awesome he was in this role. I think, Yeah. And the fact that it was only a 1-season thing, it kind of freed him up to like just springboard off of that success and go do other things, which worked out for him well, I think. But yeah, just in the story, it's also interesting to me how Robert's failed assassination attempt sort of it's set up like it's going to spur this. Now all of a sudden he's going to take his Khalasar across the sea when he wasn't going to before, and it's just so cleverly done, because when you see this scene, you think you know how it's going to play out. You're like, oh shit, they've really screwed it up now. They've kicked the hornet's nest. Khal Drogo's coming over. He's going to fuck everybody up, and the confidence Martin had in his story to then kill off this character so quickly after this is wild to me. Like that's so crazy, and it's impressive.
Again, I've said this throughout our whole coverage, but just thinking of a version of this story where Drogo actually gets across with his Khalasar is just a crazy thought. Yeah. Just seeing I mean, we see Jorah go up against some Dothraki, but
we do eventually, because we see, in the most recent season, we're seeing that. But it's Dany at the head of it, not Drogo. Right. But, she's at the head of a bunch of Dothraki screamers in season 7 there. Yeah,
she is, that was an intense scene. That was crazy.
Yeah, it's cool, man. So yeah, this will bounce around to some other scenes that were in this episode. Fucking Littlefinger and his betrayals and his manipulations, and then Janos Slint, who is one of the like most despicable characters that doesn't actually do a ton. He just like, I don't know, I hate him.
Yeah, it's like the other guy, the other one who kills Sirio, and like eventually like we see how awful he is.
Oh, Marin Trant.
Exactly. Yeah, he's such a like, he has such a little amount to do, but you hate him so much the entire time. And
yeah. Speaking of that, do you buy into any of the Sirio Farrell theories?
So I did for a long time, especially as the show, like around like season 4 or 5 when we were getting some of the House of Black and White. I thought for sure Sirio I was like, he's a faceless man. He's got something. He's still alive. Can't think of any other really theories other than the fact that he's still alive right now.
Well, that he is Jaqen H'ghar is the theory. That him and Jaqen H'ghar are one and the same. I think is the main theory for him. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that could be true in the book. I don't know if it will be. That to me feels like kind of an out there theory. But he does. I mean, what lends itself to this is we don't see him die, and by like all rules of storytelling, if you don't see someone die, they could still be alive.
Yeah, I listened this time very, very closely when Arya was running away, and it really sounds like someone was disarmed. Like the sword noise that you hear sounds like somebody dropped their sword.
Yeah.
But I guess the flip side to that is we see...
Could have been Marin Trant. But Marin Trant's alive later, though. I think it's quite telling.
Until we saw Marin Trant, I assumed that Marin Trant went down.
And there's no way Sirio like is Marin Trant or anything like that, because he's doing too many just like terrible Marin Trant things.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's that is baffling, like how that could be, but... And then I just think it's also one of those things where like it could be different in the books than in the show. And I think in the show, they're not going to go all the way back to Sirio Farrell season 1. I don't think at this point.
No, but that does bring up an interesting one that's set up here at the end of this with Gendry and Arya. And do you think that there's anything to? I mean, Gendry clearly is the Baratheon bastard heir.
Yeah.
That he's like he would be the first in line. But in season 1, Robert talks to Ned about how he wants to join their houses. Do you think that Arya and Gendry are the way that the Baratheon Stark houses come together, are bound by blood, or?
Yeah, I mean...
They definitely set it up in season 2 more than season 1, but it's like the very beginning of it is here in season 1.
I personally don't think it's going to happen, but that's just kind of like my own personal feelings. I really don't know. Gendry is kind of a mysterious character. His story is pretty different in the book and in the show, because in the show they also roll in a couple other character stories into his. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough to say what that's something I'll definitely be on the lookout for in this final season. What is the ultimate fate here? Because he's this lowborn Baratheon who has the commoners commoners mindset and the commoners on his mind. So people could argue that he would make a good king because he would actually care about people. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't really see Arya's story ultimately coming to her being with Gendry. It just doesn't feel like something she'd be interested in at this point. She's gone through some, I don't know, it just doesn't seem like something she'd go for at this point.
Yeah, I agree with that. But yeah, we're getting a little bit out of this episode here. So Ned Stark in the book, he basically has Littlefinger try and buy the gold cloaks. Like he concedes to do this. But then Littlefinger sides with the Lannisters, it seems like. And the gold cloaks are actually in Cersei's favor, and it's more than just being bought. It's like Harrenhal and all this stuff to Janos Slint.
Right, which is in the show. I did want to say was like a background like as Sansa's walking into the court is something we hear in the background. So that was like a cool little background detail that they put in that was in the book. Yeah,
I agree. I think that was cool. And then, so what I'm trying to say is where was the point in which he could have changed things? And to me, it is his conversation with Renly.
My thing is, he also, we talked about it before, but he's too brash. He's too blatant about the way he threatens Cersei. To
a point, but then he doesn't act when the moment comes. And I honestly think that moment is when Renly comes to him. And he says, we need to seize Joffrey and do it now before Cersei has time to make her plans. And he's so right.
Well, he's correct in terms of winning the throne, but I do agree with Ned here because it is literally like Robert's not even dead and you're going to drag his son out, and at this point he's basically just an innocent kid. So I understand why Ned would say no, but it's just like if he had not had that conversation with Cersei and they just did everything that they needed to. I guess the main thing was that Ned didn't expect Robert to die so quickly. If he had died a day or two later, I think Ned's plans would have been in place to where he could have peacefully taken power. But Cersei, like, because he died so quickly, Cersei and Joffrey were able to immediately be like, he's on, you know what I mean? If Ned didn't come into the throne room to find Joffrey there with the whole court assembled, I think things may have gone a little differently. Maybe if Ned had already had everybody on his side.
This was, I think, kind of a test from Renly. He wanted to see like how committed Ned was to this, and was he willing to do what needed to be done. And Ned basically said, "No, I'm not." And so Renly was like, "All right, I'm getting the fuck out of here," and then he left.
And I think the other implication is if the implication would be if Ned said yes to Renly, then he's acknowledging Renly's basically place on the throne rather than Stannis, which Ned believes in.
Yeah, no, and I agree that is definitely something that gets discussed, and I guess my thought is that like that can be figured out once you have control. Yeah. And Renly's rightly pointing out that they need to seize control now, or they're going to miss their window. And Ned basically says like, yeah, I'm not gonna like, you know, sully Robert's name by having this happen right while he's still alive, and like all this stuff, and you know this. But to me, this is like. Because like before we were talking about murdering children, and like Ned has a hard line, like I'm not going to murder a child, and that's why he tells Cersei about that he knows about Joffrey, because he doesn't want to murder Joffrey, or he doesn't want Robert to murder Joffrey. So I can get on board with that, because like I understand that's like a moral thing, and we're cheering him on for not wanting to murder Dany, then we got to cheer him on there too. But this, to me, he's not saying let's murder Joffrey. He's just saying let's capture him. And this is the kind of dirty stuff you have to do, I think, to succeed at the Game of Thrones.
Well, and that Cersei out and out says that. Like, Cersei says, you know, in the Game of Thrones, you win or you die.
Win or you die, yeah. Which is that's what this episode is, right? So, yeah, anyway, I think that's... Because we were talking last episode about Ned constantly making the right decision, but still it all ends up bad for him. That was one of the moments where, even if he didn't say like, okay, Renly, let's like team up and do this together, that was still the right move regardless, and he could have done it with his own men maybe, right? Like he needed to act then. He didn't. Instead he waits and plots too much and relies on Littlefinger way too much.
Right. Well, that is the other thing that could be argued, is that he was good in his mind. Like Littlefinger was loyal enough to Catelyn to not betray him. And that was his biggest mistake, obviously.
Yeah, trusting Littlefinger. He should have trusted Varys a little more and Littlefinger a lot less.
Yeah, I find it interesting that in the book, Varys is kind of positioning himself as somebody who serves Littlefinger, whereas in the show they're kind of equals that are like matching each other. Because in the book, when Ned meets with Varys below in the cells, he talks about how he's just like Littlefinger, and basically Varys is like, no, I just tell him the things that he wants to know. I tell him what he needs to know, not everything, in order for him to think that I serve him, kind of.
Yeah, because I think it's because Varys he doesn't have a lot of power. He's just the spider, you know, he's just the master of whisperers or whatever. So he has to sort of play into everybody else's power and let everybody else think that they have more power than him, and that includes Littlefinger in the show, or in the book at least. Yeah, I agree. In the show, it seems a little bit more like they elevated Varys in standing a little bit to be more equal with him.
I think that a huge detail that's going to become important, because I think that so much importance was put on the heir of the Baratheons that something has to come from it at some point. Or maybe it is that thing that we're supposed to be focusing on while he's pulling other strings, and ultimately once it gets down to the end, it's not going to matter. But the fact that Ned changed it from Joffrey to his rightful heir, being the one who would take the throne, I think is an important move.
Yeah, and at the very least, this shows us that Ned isn't as strict on his honor as he may like for everybody else to believe, right? Because in this moment, he has to essentially write down something that Robert didn't say.
Right.
So that goes against your personal honor, right? So
right, but I guess ultimately it doesn't matter because Cersei just rips that letter up.
Yeah, so it's like, to me it's sad because we're seeing Ned compromise on his honor here a few times, but his downfall is that he doesn't compromise enough,
or early enough.
Yeah, he waits until it's too late. Yeah, let's get into the next episode, I think. So episode 8 is called The Pointy End. Oh, and this is the one we talked about earlier, that Martin wrote an episode. And I saw that he wrote this one. Did you read anything about that or see anything about that?
He wrote an episode per season, I think through season 3 or 4, and then kind of realized that it was taking time away from writing the actual novel.
Yeah.
So I think he stopped at some point.
Which we still don't have, so.
But I do love the idea of him shaping an episode all himself, because that, like, especially it's always an important one. The ones that he writes aren't like some setup. You know, you're getting the correct execution when George R. R. Martin is writing the screenplay for the episode.
Yeah. All right, so I'll read the description here for this one. Episode 8 was called The Pointy End. Arya manages to escape the Red Keep after her Bravosian swordmaster delays the guards sent to arrest her. Oh, so that happens in this episode. We thought maybe it happened in the last one, it sounds like. It's set up in the last one, but it starts here at the start of this episode. But Sansa is captured. Robb hears the news and prepares the northern armies to fight the Lannisters, leaving Bran behind to rule Winterfell. Lysa refuses to fight the Lannisters, and Catelyn leaves to join Robb's camp. Tyrion and Bronn are surrounded by Shagga and his men. Tyrion convinces them to escort them to Tywin, who will repay them. They arrive at Tywin's camp, where the latter asks Shagga to help them in their confrontation with the Starks in exchange for even greater payment. Joffrey appoints Tywin as his hand. Sansa begs Joffrey to show mercy upon Ned. Joffrey agrees if Ned publicly recognizes Joffrey's claim to the throne and admits to having committed treason. At the Wall, some bodies are affected by the White Walkers are found. In Essos, Drogo's soldiers begin attacking nearby settlements, enslaving locals in order to sell them and gain the money to buy the ships necessary to cross the Narrow Sea. It's interesting that he wrote this one, because this to me is also a lot of like stage setting for what's to come. Like the final act is like being prepared for, but this actually isn't all the like big shit going down.
Yeah, if you were thinking he would write the biggest episode, he would have written the next episode, episode 9.
So there is an amazing, just speaking of the Momoa stuff, the incredible Momoa fight happens here, where he kills one of his own blood riders or whatever, and rips out his tongue and throat, or rips out his like, yeah, I think it's like
tongue through his throat.
It's through his throat. It's and he just like shows it to him as he dies. Like that's one of the fucking most badass, crazy scenes.
Have you seen real quick? Have you seen MacGruber?
No.
The movie based on the SNL skit.
No, I haven't. I'm aware of it, but I haven't seen it.
He throughout the entire movie, he just constantly throat rips guys. So he just like goes up and like rips people's throats out, and that's like his go-to move. And so like it kind of made me think of that.
Oh, that's funny. So what I was going to say is there is perhaps apocryphal story. I don't know, but I've always heard that Momoa himself approached Dan and David, and said, this Khal Drogo guy, everybody talks about how much of a badass he is, but we don't actually see him do anything badass. He needs to have a scene where he demonstrates how fierce of a warrior he is. And they agreed and ended up writing this scene in specifically for him, because this isn't how it goes down in the book.
He just gets the scratch in battle.
Yeah, he's it's like off page. He's gotten wounded in battle. It's a little bit more than a scratch. I think in the book he calls it a scratch, but it's like his nipple's missing and he's got this big gash across his chest. In the show, it is a literal like scratch where it's almost like he didn't even need to get that scene to, in my opinion, because it was so minor.
And I think that Dany kind of makes some Ned mistakes here.
Well, she's too trusting.
She's too trusting,
and she's naive a little bit here for sure.
Yeah. And she ultimately, like, you could say Drogo would still be alive if not for Dany.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think we ever get it 100% confirmed that Mira, what's her last name? Mira Mazdul?
Maz something, yeah. I'm not sure the last name.
I think it's Mazdul. That we don't get her confirming that she poisoned Drogo, right?
In the book or the show? Because I feel like the show, it's pretty blatant that because she says like, I did this because he went through and burned my temple and I was raped a bunch of times beforehand. And
yeah, but it's more just like Dany's asking like, what, I bought his life. What is this life? You didn't tell me that this is what it's going to be like. And then she answers by saying that, like the ritual she did to bring him back to this point. But I'm talking about specifically like the reason his wound festers and he's laid low. I always assumed it's because she was poisoning him or like putting something in the wound care that makes it actually, like rot. And I think that is what happens. You know what I mean? Like, I think that we can read between the lines, but I just don't know that there actually is any confirmation of that 100% given by the character.
I don't think that anybody verbatim says that that's how it goes down, but the Dothraki are very specific about how they don't trust her, and she's a witch, and she clearly, by the end, had ulterior motives, so it makes me think that we're definitely supposed to think she was poisoning him.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought it was interesting that it wasn't actually specifically said, because I had always just assumed that's what happened, and I think it's a safe assumption, though. So yeah, back at Winterfell, Robb deciding to call the banners. I thought it was a pretty epic moment, and I like the way they did it with Mr. Lewin. He kind of says, like, all of them. And he's like, yes, all the banners. I love it. And then he looks all, like, kind of proud. He has this, like, certain gleam in his eye. I don't know. That was cool.
Yeah. Knowing all of the stuff that we know now, you can see through one season of Game of Thrones or through the first book, you can see that George R. R. Martin's doing something different than normal fantasy, but where you think it's going to continue down the path of another normal fantasy novel, like this hero dies, so his son's going to rise to take on the people who killed him. That was the moment. Like, I think it wasn't until Robb goes down that I realized, like, oh, like both of the in reaction to Ned dying, Robb becomes the king in the north, and he goes south, and he's killing everybody, and everything's perfect. Yeah. Until he also makes a questionable move, and then ultimately goes down to, and that's the moment where it's like, holy shit. That's why people say, like, if you love a character, they're dead. It's because the people who you're pulling for, the Starks, are multiple times just like completely screwed over.
That leads me to an observation I had that I was going to save a little bit until we get into to these next episodes, but I think it's a good time to talk about it now. We see the fall of several major warrior leaders in Game of Thrones, like basically all of them. Here, like we see, so Ned Stark several times over says that he's a soldier. He knows how to fight, all that stuff, kill his enemies. We see him lose to Cersei, essentially. We see Robert lose to Cersei. He is another soldier who notoriously bad at ruling, even though he was very good at conquering. We see Khal Drogo, who is this warrior leader, the head of his Khalasar. We see him fall to Poisoner. So, and that's just the beginning, like you said, like that continues on.
Well, we see. I would also say like other major like soldiers who are basically defeated are like Barristan Selmy is disgraced and leaves, and like Jaime Lannister, the greatest swordsman, goes down. Robb's able to capture him, and like it seems like they take everyone out of the equation that you could have seen them succeeding purely on like might or like military strategy, and it turns into almost like these lower characters who aren't maybe as physically able but have like the mental capacity to challenge everyone. Yeah, are kind of the main focus from here.
Well, and if you track that throughout, obviously we're in full spoilers for everything here, but later seasons you got Robb going down to the Red Wedding. You get
ultimately Jon goes down.
You get the old bear. The old bear goes down, who's leading the Night's Watch. Yeah, Jon even goes down to an extent. He just comes back. Right. The one that I see that hasn't fallen yet, not truly, although she has her ups and downs, is Dany. But that makes me wonder what's going to happen in this final season with her, because she is the exact blueprint of a conquering hero who is great at conquering, but isn't necessarily very good at ruling. Because we saw her struggling to rule in Essos. And so I wonder how she's going to do now that she is in Westeros and is in position to maybe seize the throne. If that is the end game, I don't know how I feel about a final end game where Dany sits the throne, because I don't know how good of a ruler she would really be.
To me, it just doesn't seem very George R. R. Martin. She's succeeded far too easily all the way through the show. She's had hardships, but not nearly as many as other people.
Well, I guess that's debatable. She's had a lot of hardships for sure, but she is definitely the mold of Robert himself, right? She is the conqueror, and she's coming to Westeros with like, what is it, 400,000? No, 40,000? I don't know. Huge number of Dothraki who are going to be, raiding the countryside, burning everything. Sure, she's going to rein them in some, but ultimately, like, that's what they are. Like, and they're, now they're in Westeros. They're not going to leave. And, what happens after the war's over? Like, do they just, become farmers? Like, what are they going to do? Like, so I don't know. It seems to me like she's all about getting the throne, but like I don't know that she actually really wants to rule. It's more that she thinks it's hers by right, and that makes me a little bit uncomfortable because that's very like, But you maybe you hope that John can help her in that regard, but I don't know. I think the what I'm trying to say is I feel like the show has been trying to tell us that these kind of people don't make good rulers.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if she's going to be different than that if it comes down to her at the end. That's why I don't know. Maybe like who knows? There's another podcast I listen to called Bald Move, which they're great. They're great podcasts. Check them out. They have a whole series of Game of Thrones episodes, many episodes. And one of the things I think it's Aaron on there always talks about is like, what is Martin playing at? And I think that's a great question. Is like what. All of this has been leading to something we're going to get in the final season, and it's going to be what's the government look like at the end of Game of Thrones? And you could argue that that's what he's been building up to all along. Is it going to be like are they going to dissolve the monarchy in favor of a republic or something, like with a constitution and a democracy, or is it like just another conqueror sitting the throne? Who knows?
What if, or they just get set back so far, there's so few people left after the war or something, they get set back so far that it's almost like early days of Westeros when there's just like there's the people in the north and some people here and there, but not a lot of people to like maybe they're like the Seven Kingdoms are separated by their own rulers or something like that again.
Yeah, the Seven Kingdoms separate. I could see that too. I don't know how satisfying that is, but yeah, I'm just going to be very fascinated to see where that goes. We're taking up a lot of time talking about it, so let's move on. So we get the scene where Tywin is cutting up the stag that we mentioned last episode in his introduction, and Charles Dance just is amazing as Tywin Lannister. He's so imposing, and one of the things my wife looked up while we were watching it because we started talking about it. That is a real stag that he is really carving up there. It is not a fake prop.
I had this as a little trivia fact to tell you about. He learned the day before he learned how to do that.
Yeah.
So they had like a master carver come in and show him how to like cut up a deer, and he did it while he was delivering his lines and everything for the actual scene the next day.
That's so wild.
I mean, he absolutely. I think I would say, especially early on, other than like Sean Bean, he would be, in my opinion, turning in the greatest performance. He was absolutely so imposing.
I wonder if they got into any trouble for that. Because it's like you could argue that an animal was harmed in the making of it. Now, that our animal was probably, you know what I mean? Like, it's probably like venison that they were going to sell at a market or something. But, yeah, I don't know. I wonder if they had gotten any trouble for that with like PETA or somebody like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I feel like it's one of those things where they're not going to go kill it specifically for the use of the show. So it wasn't necessarily harmed for the making of it.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. Maybe. I'm sure PETA probably wasn't happy about it, but PETA usually isn't happy about seeing animals
that's true.
harmed. So I think the last thing I wanted to talk about was just the fact that Arya finally used a needle to actually straight up murder a kid. I mean, the kid was coming after her. Didn't expect her to necessarily murder the kid for it, but she's starting to, you can kind of see where she's like this feral, she's on her own, she's surviving on her own at this point. She's kind of escaped the watchful eye of everybody in the Kingsguard and everything like that. So she's surviving on her own at this point. And you can see that she's kind of having to fend for herself and sticking somebody with the pointy end this early on.
Yeah, man, and it's dark. This is the beginning of many dark turns she's going to take that leads her to being a faceless assassin by season 7. But it's a big moment, right? This is her first kill. And it is this boy. I'm trying to remember the differences between book and show here. I felt like in the show they maybe made it seem less important, or less important, less of a moment where Arya didn't have any other choice. But whereas in the book it felt like she had to do it more.
I think so.
Does that make sense?
I agree with that.
It felt to me like in the show she could have just run away or something, but in the book it was like he had her, he was going to turn her over to the queen. She had no real choice. I guess she could have just like wounded him or something, but it almost felt like accidental too. Like she didn't realize it was going to kill him. Although she stabbed him like all the way through and the point came out the back of him, so who knows? It's pretty brutal in the book too. I don't know. Yeah, it's an important scene. Just to bounce back to that Tywin scene though for a minute, actually, I love to see Tywin and Jaime here because I feel like we've always seen that relationship through Tyrion's eyes and how Jaime is kind of like the favorite son and Tyrion's this kind of hated runt of the family. Yet I like to see the weight of the expectations and sort of disappointment Tywin has in Jaime even here because of him joining the Kingsguard and all that. It just it's a fascinating relationship all around in the Lannister family and very dysfunctional.
Yeah. The way that he talks about Jaime and how Jaime's too concerned with what other people think, I think is this moment for us to see Jaime's humanity through how much of an asshole he's been through the whole first book and season, where he does care about what people think about him, and it does affect him when people call him the Kingslayer, because like we mentioned before, he was doing the right thing in his eyes.
What a fucking hypocrite, though. Tywin is such a hypocrite because Tywin cares about what other people think more than anything else. It seems like.
Yeah, but he wants Jaime to be like he wants Jaime to become him in some way at some point, and I think Tywin, at least to have the confidence to realize like even if somebody thinks something of you, it's better to be feared than to kind of like be affected by what people think. I don't think Tywin's like losing sleep at night about what people say about him. He just wants people to fear him.
I mean, this is a man who all he cares about is the legacy of his own name, and he tells Tyrion, like, you're not going to bring that whore to court, which is all about appearances, right, to the Lannister name. So even if it isn't, like, personal, like, he cares about what people think about the Lannisters. And to me, it's kind of hypocritical to say, like, why do you care what people think of you? When, like, that's his main operating thing. And that's also the reason that for, like... all of this like showmanship about the wealth of the Lannisters, right? And why he projects all this wealth. It's because he wants everyone to think that about him. Like he's obsessed with people thinking of him as this really wealthful, successful family. I don't know. It's just Tywin is a fascinating character who, in my opinion, is kind of full of shit. It's just like he doesn't approve of the way that Jaime cares about honor, and he doesn't agree with that take and like that being a virtue. And so that's what he actually disagrees with, even though he calls it, you care about what other people think of you, but that's not actually what it is. I think he just doesn't care about honor in the way that Jaime does.
Yeah, I can see that. But he does, I mean, it's about legacy, not honor for him.
Yeah.
Like you said, which legacy I feel like is tied into honor in some ways. But ultimately, like he'll do whatever he can. He's not honorable in keeping his legacy untainted.
I think it's more that he knows that, like, the winners, it's said many times, like, history is written by the winners. Right. And so he just cares, he just knows that the Lannisters have to come out on top, and then they can rewrite things to say whatever they want about, like, how they actually got there. And so that's the ultimate end goal for him. Which, come to think of it, it's like, that dream of Tywin's is gone now, right? It's the most part. Is Cersei pregnant in the last season of Game of Thrones?
I think so.
I think she is. I think that was revealed. Yeah. So that I guess is the one that maybe it won't end up being the end of the Lannister line. But
I don't. The thing is, I don't see Cersei making it out. So it'll be interesting to track that and see if that's even an important thing or if it's just a shocking moment at the end of last season. So one more thing that I want to talk about in this episode, because we definitely need to move on to the next one, but
yeah,
I just wanted to go back around to Robb and the conversation that he has with his mom, with Catelyn, as she shows up to their camp and kind of she's seeing him as this leader now, and Robb is having to take on all the responsibility, and the way that he handles John Umber, especially with the use of Grey Wind, is just such a good, and it was almost verbatim from the book, everything that happened. And your meat is tough. He asks him, he says something about how, I hope you're not unsheathing your blade for anything other than cutting my meat. And he's like, your meat is tough, when he loses 2 fingers. And just the joy and the toughness of the North you can see throughout everyone.
Yeah, it's cool.
It's awesome. And like I said before, Robb being set up as kind of the next coming of Ned, and you can see how he's gonna follow in his dad's footsteps in the way of battle and in the way of politics. It seems it just seems it's something to hang on to for us Stark family fans.
Yeah, I agree. And it's cool, and just seeing the North rise and go on the warpath is fun because we know it doesn't end up well, but for now it's going very well for them, and yeah, cool to see.
Episode 9 is Baelor. The Stark army arrives at the twins' castle. Catelyn convinces Lord Frey to let them pass and assist them, in exchange for her agreeing to the marriage of Robb and Arya to Frey's children in the future. Robb sacrifices 2,000 soldiers in a confrontation with the Lannister army to capture Jaime. In a public hearing, Ned confesses to treason and publicly affirms Joffrey as rightful heir. However, rather than sentencing him to the wall as had been negotiated, the vengeful Joffrey has him decapitated, while Sansa and Cersei and the other counselors objectify futilely. Sansa watches her father die, and Arya is present in the crowd. At the wall, Commander Mormont gives his family sword to Jon in gratitude, and Maester Aemon reveals to Jon that Aemon is a Targaryen. In Essos, Drogo's wound becomes septic, and his death is imminent. Daenerys convinces a slave woman to use blood magic to save him. The woman tells everyone to leave the tent and stay out until the spell is over. Daenerys goes into labor, and Jorah brings her into the forbidden tent, seeking aid.
A lot of big stuff in this episode.
I mean, this is the episode, right? This is the... Yeah. I would say this is the climax of the whole season.
Yeah. Where do we want to start? You just tell me what scene we're starting with.
Let's talk about the biggest thing last. So for now, let's talk about Robb. We were just talking about him, talking about his deciding to marry the Frey's children in the future.
And so they change it a little bit here because Catelyn goes in and negotiates all of this. But in the show, I thought it was interesting that Robb seems way more reluctant and kind of like dissatisfied with the whole thing, and he like reluctantly agrees to do it. Whereas in the book, it shows more that like he's all about it. He's like, yeah, that's fine. I don't care. What do you think the difference is there, and why is it different?
I think it's just the advantage of hindsight. Like they knew. I think George R. R. Martin may have had it basically planned out, but they knew exactly what.
He definitely did. Think about what's happening with the Freys right now. This is all for the Red Wedding.
But he doesn't have it physically written out fully and potentially as far as it's going to, the exact details of how it's going to go down. And honestly, like having Robb not be reluctant at this point, because he's so vengeful and he's so involved in the war, doesn't surprise me either. Like how it plays in the book is fine with me. But in the show, knowing that ultimately he's going to betray that promise that he makes, having him a little more hesitant, I think it maybe makes it easier for the audience to understand, like, oh, he doesn't necessarily want this, but he's willing to do it for the greater good for now.
It does make a weird moment where he basically asks Catelyn, like, if any of Frey's daughters were hot.
And then Catelyn's like, yeah, one was. She was like, one was, and doesn't give any adjective.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of weird. Because, like, clearly that's not what's important here. By any stretch.
Right.
So that to me is a very like that's like the boy in Robb is still there, I guess. And so they're trying to highlight that in the show. So I can see why they did it. It
kind of got me thinking about the arranged marriages in Game of Thrones that we know of, or seemingly the political marriages. And I got me thinking about Jon Arryn and his wife Lysa, and kind of ultimately it's from afar, just kind of context clues. She had him killed, we know, or a combination of her and Littlefinger. And we know that there were different motives, but clearly she wasn't happy with Jon Arryn. And we know Jon Arryn is this very honorable person who probably would have been similar to Ned in a relationship as far as being like, you know, doing it for the cause and then probably eventually being happy, depending on the woman. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting to think of their relationship. And maybe, you know,
honestly, I think Ned and Catelyn is one of the few arranged marriages, political marriages that we see here that is like has turned into a genuine loving marriage.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, Ned and Catelyn's relationship seems to have started as an arrangement, and then ultimately they really did fall in love with each other.
It definitely was, because Catelyn was originally supposed to be with his brother.
Exactly. Yeah. Which it seems that she was happy with that marriage as well.
Yeah, I think she was more into that marriage and Ned was this kind of unknown. So I think it took some time, and that also like tells a lot about that early stages, because basically Robb, we learn in the book, I'm not sure if it was in the movie or in the show, but we learned that Robb was conceived on their wedding night, and then Ned went off to war right after that, and so he didn't even know, I don't think, that he was going to have Robb potentially when all the stuff went down with Jon. John being born.
Wow. Yeah.
Or maybe he knew she was pregnant, assuming he maybe got a raven out to him or something. But it was this like they'd only spent like a couple nights together. You know what I mean? Like he didn't have this love that he has for Catelyn now.
And I like you can kind of see Catelyn's point of view and how much she cares about Robb through that. Not only does he look like her family, not only does he look like a Tully, but it was like Ned was gone and it was just her and Robb, the baby Robb. And you could even see Robb maybe being the way that Ned and Catelyn ultimately came together and started to love each other in a true way.
Yeah, maybe. So I do want to get into one of my biggest disappointments with the show. And I will fully admit that I totally understand why this is the case. It's money. It's budget. But I am so disappointed in what happens with these major battles in the show.
I was going to ask you, what's the most disappointing thing about this season to you?
That's it,
and
man.
I thought that you might say this.
Tyrion being put in the van is such a crazy thing that happens in the book. And then he decides he's going to go in there with his clansmen. He realizes that he's being set up for he's put on a weak point in the line because Tywin wants the Starks to see the weak point in the line, charge through, and then they're gonna like flank him and like basically get him up against the river and defeat him that way. And so it's all this thing that like Tywin basically wants to sacrifice that part of his line that Tyrion is in, and instead Tyrion is able to like rally his clansmen to actually withstand the charge, and Tyrion kills a couple dudes and has this like big crazy fight. And really, does well for himself in this battle. And so we see that like this sets up to me what happens with the Blackwater episodes later, because we see him do this here. And I know that it's budgetary, and that's why they had to do it this way. But it is to me it takes all of that van stuff, which still happens. Like Tywin sets it all up, but then none of it matters because he just gets knocked out at the start of the fight. And so to me, it feels like a dangling plot thread. Like, why was that important?
I'm sure that they wish they could take it back, and they wish they could throw in at least some sort of battle or a couple of skirmishes from the battle.
Well, I'm sure if they had the budget they have now, they could.
Exactly, yeah. And yeah, it's just a product of the lower budget, I think. It was kind of a cheesy way to do it. Like it's tried and true method. If you don't want to show the multi-million-dollar battle, you have somebody get a POV character get knocked out, and then they wake up at the end. Yeah, it was a disappointing thing for me as well. I wanted to talk about it because this also, to me, in the book, is a reason. It's like a moment where Tywin doesn't show it, but it's like a respect moment for him when looking at Tyrion. And you can almost say that like this in turn, and also his kind of the way he thinks of Robb, and he's kind of the only person who says like, oh, Robb maybe a little more dangerous than you're giving him credit for, is some of the reasons why he chooses Tyrion to go act his hand. Yeah,
absolutely. I agree. He gets a little bit of respect for him for this in the book, and in the show, I guess we're to assume that he thinks that Tyrion did the same stuff, even though he didn't. The other thing that we lose out on is some Gregor Clegane like being
ridiculous,
just freaking crazy dude on the battlefield.
Yeah,
in the book, like he's this unstoppable force on the battlefield, and we don't get to see that.
His like at one point his horse like goes down, and he just jumps off his horse, and he just starts killing everyone in the vicinity. It's insane.
And he's the first person at the head of the van.
And he said if anybody falls off, any of his men fall off, he'll chase after them and kill his own men. If they fall back.
He's a fucking madman and a berserker and just a force. And to me, this is like some of the stuff that really sells him here. But it's also like he's such a dark, twisted character, and like we know that he's been the one who's been like pillaging the Riverlands and like doing crazy stuff that made Ned order Beric Dondarrion to take him down.
Yeah, not to mention what Tywin had him do to Rhaegar's kids and everything.
Yeah, not to mention that. Yeah, he does like the dirtiest of dirty work. And then at the end of this, he's left to do more of it. Like Tywin orders him to burn the Riverlands, and the amount of suffering that Gregor Clegane inflicts on the small folk is pretty wild when you think about it.
And that's why it's such an epic moment in the show and the book, when Ned's like, fuck it, take him down, strip him of all land, all titles, all everything, and bring him to justice.
And like, I feel like in the show, it's not as big though. It's in the book, it's huge, but in the show, it's like it's just one of several things. It's almost more about Tywin, how he orders Tywin to come to court. And
That's
all that.
true, but I just mean that like having the context of the book and then hearing Sean Bean deliver the speech is pretty epic.
Well, and here's the other thing. So the absolute brutality in which Gregor does what is ordered of him, is what creates the Brotherhood without banners, essentially. Because they can't like let it stand. So they almost turn brigand, but the brigand part of them is just to take out Lannisters wherever they find them. And like it's kind of like in revenge for what Gregor does here. Which is really interesting. So he's setting all this stuff up now, which becomes much more important in like books 2 and 3, I think. But yeah, it's just really cool to see the early stages here. And yeah, I was disappointed that. The other thing is the Whispering Wood, where Robb takes Jaime. Now in the book, it is told through Catelyn's perspective, as she is like looking on and she hears some sounds and she sees a couple of like things through the trees happening. But we do also get like a lot more of a description of the battle, to where it felt to me like there was enough there that if they had wanted to film it, they could have, but they don't. Yeah, there was a lot of really cool stuff there about Jaime Lannister just like also being a madman on the battlefield, right? And how like he knows he's lost, but he still kills like 10 dudes or whatever, and including like both sons of one of the Karstarks, which becomes important later. Yeah, so like we also see Jaime just being a madman. And like I don't know if it was, I think it was mentioned in the show, but like in the book, Jaime had been winning tons of battles up to this point. Like it's outlined that he is winning left and right. Like he is just like dominating up until this point. So this is such a great move to take him off the battlefield, essentially, by Robb. This is a very important moment.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of talked about more in the book, but just the fact that he sacrificed 2,000 men to Tywin in order to take Jaime is such a huge decision for in the book 15-year-old kid to make. And
it's interesting that in the book he assigns Roose Bolton as the leader of those 2,000 men, because Roose Bolton, like, it doesn't care. He's like, okay, I'll do it. You know,
he's a psycho vampire.
Yeah, and Roose Bolton is creepy, and like, we haven't seen Roose at all in season 1, have we? Like, we assume he's around, but we haven't seen him. It's interesting that he is in the book, though.
The banners, you know what? It's interesting when they do the King in the North speech. The Bolton banners are in the background.
Yeah, I think he's supposed to be there.
We're to assume that he's there in that room.
I think we are to assume that.
Maester Aemon is the last Targaryen other than Dany.
Yes.
And he's speaking to a Targaryen that no one else knows about.
Yeah. Watching this scene now is so we actually did the I don't know if you thought about it, but the actual like tree, like how he's actually related to Jon. Do you know?
Oh yeah. Well, I know how he's. Well, let me think about it for a second, and I'm sure I can piece it out. So Maekar is his father, so he's the brother of Aegon.
Yes, he is the uncle of the Mad King, which makes him the great uncle, I believe, of Jon.
It could potentially be great. Hold on, let me think. So Jon to Rhaegar, who Rhaegar
is his father.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Go up one. So father, son of Aerys.
So Aerys is his grandfather.
Yeah, so great, I believe, right? So Aemon is a, and I love the scene we get with him because he's ancient.
He is. That also shows how ancient he is, man.
Yeah. And
that's wild.
They talk about how, 30 years before the start of the show, ish, would have been like everything that goes on with Robert's Rebellion, and he talks about his struggle. He was at the point that he hears that his family's being taken down. He's an old blind man, so even if he wanted to do anything, he couldn't.
It's a great scene, really powerful, and it's funny because it works really well not knowing anything about Jon's parentage. Like, it just works really well. It's like a cool backstory for the Targaryens, but also like the surprise backstory for Aemon. And you're like, oh, this guy's actually this ancient Targaryen. He's really cool. But man, watching it back now, knowing what we know about Jon, just really adds a dimension to that whole scene of how neither of them know. Like, he doesn't know that Jon's a Targaryen, but in this moment, he's giving him advice to, someone who's a part of his family line.
So the biggest moment of the entire episode, most shocking thing of the entire season for a lot of viewers, Ned proclaims Joffrey as king and says that he's the rightful heir, and then betrays his honor to do that.
Yep.
And then ultimately is killed anyway because of Joffrey. It's just Joffrey.
Yeah, man. There's several things I want to talk about here. So yeah, first one. There's a big change in the show. Ned sees Arya out in the crowd. Now he might have seen her in the book, but we don't know because we're not in his perspective, when Arya's perspective. But we see for sure he sees her in the book in the show because he tells Yoren to go to her.
Well, Yoren gets to her in both the book and the show.
Yeah, but in the book, I always took it to be that Yoren just knew what she looked like he'd seen her before at Winterfell or something, and just found her. Like, I didn't think he was told by Ned by any stretch.
Right.
Like, I think that was a show. Now, to me, it kind of fills in a potential plot hole of like, how does Yoren know what Arya Stark looks like? But I felt like you could explain that away by like he's been to Winterfell before and he's probably seen her.
Well, we saw him in Winterfell, didn't we?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he might be there early on, while Arya's there, like at the very beginning. I'm not really sure, but
one thing though, in the show, when he talks to him and tells him, he's signaling to him that Arya is somewhere, but he says Baelor.
He just says Baelor because she's at the statue.
Because the statue of Baelor, right?
Yeah.
Do you find? Is there any? Because Baelor, do you think there's any significance to the fact that she was standing on the statue of Baelor?
Oh, I didn't think about that. What do you think the significance is?
I honestly didn't look into it or anything, but I've always I thought like, I don't know that I ever knew until this viewing that he said Baelor. I maybe thought that he was saying his name or something like that and trying to get his attention, and then like looking over.
It's probably because you have to read the book and know that she's standing next to the statue of Baelor, because in the show she's just standing next to a statue. Right. And you don't know what the statue is of, right? We know they're at the steps of the Baelor or whatever, but we don't know that that's the statue of Baelor for sure. So maybe you don't make that connection when you watch the show generally. I do like the idea that maybe it's like a holy thing, right? Like a, I don't know, like it's like a blessing that she is actually there.
Yeah, I like that he makes her look away.
Yes, so that's another thing that just plays so well, Yoren, because man, that scene is so masterfully done. I think the rising action, and then the betrayal of Joffrey, and I also just want to shout out again. I think we mentioned earlier how like everybody loves to hate Joffrey, but this actor nails this scene. Like it's just an iconic moment when he turns and he says, "But they have the weak hearts of women. Sir Ilyn, bring me his head." Like, it is such that's so well delivered, and it has to be for this moment to work. We have to like believe it 100%, and I totally do. And it's such a good moment. And man, when he orders that, and then it's like almost slow motion as like Ilyn's getting the great sword, and then that's when Yoren starts like grabbing Arya by the face and saying like, look at me," and I don't know, just like that's such a crazy moment, and like the emotions build up, and
Sansa
ends with
screaming.
him. Yeah, well, everybody, and like Cersei's trying to like tell him no, but this is like the moment of also Joffrey asserting that like, oh no, I am a crazy fucking boy king now, and everybody has to listen to me.
Yeah,
which is like that's the whole the next like 3 seasons we're gonna see a lot of that.
Fallout, right? Yeah, and Ilyn Payne is wielding ice.
Yep.
Which is another like he's executed with his family execution sword,
and the sound design of it too, because we see it's like all this noise, like everyone's shouting, Yoren yelling at Arya, people screaming, and then it drops and it's just silent, and we see Ned like just put his head bowed, thinking like he knows it's over, and he starts muttering something to himself. Now, do you know anything about the theories of this muttering? Have you read anything about it and like what he might be saying here?
No, but I mean, I just assumed something old god related, but it'd be crazy if he's like a secret warger and he wargs into a direwolf at the last second. Okay,
so that's one of the more wild theories, is that he actually is warging here. But I don't buy that at all.
No, it seems a little too magical for George R.
There's 2 major theories, and these have been supposedly debunked. But the 2 major theories are either he says Valar Morghulis here, or he says I kept my promise, which I really like that reading of.
Yeah, I like that one too.
That's my headcanon. I want to believe that that's what he says here. Like it's a thing he's saying to Lyanna, and he's thinking about Jon in this moment and all that stuff, right? Because the Promise Me Ned is such a big thing in the book. So like to me, that really like there's like a poetic thing to that. Now, the reason that this has supposedly been debunked is that Sean Bean was in an interview in 2018. Now, I'm not sure when this came out as it pertains to season 7. But Sean Bean was asked in an interview what he says there, and he claims that he was just muttering like nonsense as a prayer because he felt like Ned would pray in that moment. So like you said, just like a prayer to the old gods. or something, because he felt like that's what Ned would do in the moment right before he dies. But I don't know how much we can believe actors sometimes, man. I really don't. And because I mean, like Kit Harington said he was done with the show and out after he was killed, and cut his hair, and like, I'll remember all that. Like, no, I'm really dead. I cut my hair.
There was never a day that went by that I thought that he wasn't going to come back.
Yeah. So I don't know how much we can trust him, but even if he didn't say anything there, my headcanon is he did. Like, I really love the idea of him saying, I kept my promise.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think that yeah. And now that you say that, it makes me think about how Robert Baratheon was saying to Ned as he was dying, like, I'll say hi to Lyanna for you. And it kind of makes me a little happy to think that Robert, Lyanna, and maybe Ned are all together.
Oh man, we didn't talk about, I think we blew by that scene, but when Robert actually dies, I felt like the book version was a more powerful version. We didn't talk about this last episode, did we? Because he dies in this one here, episode 7. Yeah, I felt like the book version of that scene was the more emotional moment, and I felt like the show like has some emotion to it, but it just, I don't know, maybe it was they didn't get into all the things that were said between the two of them, but I found the Robert's death more touching in the book.
I can see that, yeah. It seems very quick in the show. It goes by really fast. It's like a couple minute scene.
Well, because I think what it is like they immediately he orders everybody out, and then he immediately says, write this down, and he gives the order. But I think in the book there's more of them two like talking about the mistakes that were made up of the way, reminiscing about old times.
Right.
I'm glad it's you here at the end with me, like all this kind of stuff, and we see their friendship, I think, shining through more. Whereas here, it's in the show, it was like a lot of that was probably cut for time. Which, by the way, like anytime I say cut for time, I also have to remember we had like a 10-minute agonizing scene with Littlefinger just dropping backstory on 2 prostitutes having sex.
We didn't even talk about that. We blew by that.
We didn't. We blew by it, but that's like the worst sex position scene. I think that's actually the scene that spawned the saying.
Yeah, that's the exact scene that it was coined.
Yeah, and like, so anytime I think about them not having time for something, like, okay, cut back on that shit and give us more of Robert and Ned or something,
Yeah.
That scene felt like it dragged on forever. Like, I know it probably was only like a 2-minute scene, but it felt like 10 plus minutes to me when I was watching it. I was like, this is so bad.
Only like a third of what he says is even important.
Yeah, I agree. All right, man. So let's get into this final episode, if you're ready.
Let's do it.
Fire and Blood. The North secedes from the 7 kingdoms and proclaims Robb as their king. With Jaime captured by the Starks and Robert's brothers challenging Joffrey's claim to the throne, Tywin appoints Tyrion as acting hand, while Tywin fights to defend Joffrey's reign. Jon plans to desert his post at the Wall to avenge Ned and support Robb, but his friends convince him to honor his oath and stay. Jon then joins a Night's Watch expedition to find Benjen beyond the Wall. Yoren, a Night's Watch recruiter, helps Arya escape King's Landing disguised as a boy, while Joffrey plans to make Sansa his queen despite her father's execution. Daenerys learns that her unborn son is dead, and Drogo has been left in a vegetative state due to the witch's treacherous magic. Daenerys ends Drogo's life. She places her 3 dragon eggs next to Drogo and lights a funeral pyre. She burns the witch alive on Drogo's pyre and walks into the flames herself. When the embers die the following morning, Dany rises unharmed, flanked by 3 newborn dragons. Jorah and other witnesses kneel before her. Let's save that scene. I think that'd be a good place to end. So let's save that scene for the end. Let's back up. Yeah, they get the King in the North moment, which is I think actually really well done in the show. Like they really that's one where like the epicness of that moment was really nailed.
Yeah, I agree. There's this moment, and I can't remember if it's the episode where Great John gets his fingers ripped off. But there's this look that Robb has, just like looking over his eyebrows, and it's like you can see Ned in there, and also like everybody talks about Robb as the young wolf, and like that guy's a young wolf. Like he's gonna tear some stuff up. And when everybody proclaims, I think John Umber basically delivers the speech, but they just proclaim him King of the North, and Theon kneels down, and it's all just that's the rising action of the fallout of Ned dying that you would typically expect to see. And then we just like you could just assume from another fantasy story that he's going to carry through and avenge his father, save his sisters, and like unite the kingdoms again.
This is why a lot of people thought that even though it felt different having Ned die, and possibly Khal Drogo die, that still this was going to end up being a classic fantasy tale.
That's what I mean, yeah.
And you know what I mean? And I think a lot of people felt that way. That's why I think book 3 is where it really says, like, no, this is something different. However, you could argue maybe we're still leading to some of these classic areas in the final season here, or in the final book. But we also talked a lot about how I really think the books and the show are going to diverge quite dramatically. So just because we get certain things in the show doesn't mean we're going to get them in the books.
And I do want to say, like, I know George R. R. Martin is setting up a lot of traditional kind of fantasy endings. I just don't see this story in the books ending in any conventional way. It's got to, because I just think it wouldn't feel right for the story for it to end in some sort of, I don't know. I just don't see it having a very happy ending. Like, I think it's going to be mostly bittersweet.
Yeah, I think he said in interviews that the ending will be bittersweet. That will be the tone of the ending. I think someone got that out of him. So we'll see if that holds true. We also got so Jon deserting here momentarily and then getting brought back by his brothers. I've always felt like it's kind of cheesy when they surround him and they recite the Night's Watch
in the show or in the book.
Kind of in both. I think it doesn't strike me. I think it plays better in the book because you don't have to like hear them say the whole thing, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. It always struck me a little cheesy.
I like it. I go in for it. I think it's just I understand why you say that though.
They like bounce around in the group and like each person says a piece of it.
Yeah.
Almost like it's like choreographed or something. I think it's part of it too.
Yeah. I like in the show they made a detail. I don't think it was in the book, but in the show, like Sam falls off the horse and Jon is like willing to go back to check it out because he you can already tell he cares for his Night's Watch brothers. He goes back to check on him and they convince him to come back. But I do like the scene overall in terms of the meaning of what happens here, because seeing Jon, as much as I want to see Jon and Robb side by side on the battlefield, the joint between this scene and the scene that he has later with Commander Mormont allow Jon to realize that the war that he has coming is much more important than any war that could be fought further south. So yeah. I like that. I like the idea that he's also bought into it to the point that his brothers can bring him back.
I agree. And, I like the way the scene ends. I like him where we leave him at the end of season 1. Honestly, all of our characters are kind of like starting their next adventure at the end here, which I think is an interesting way to end, right? And draw you into the next book and into the next season of the show.
And it's such an epic beginning to so many adventures too, because like the first one was very, very. It was like maybe 2 adventures going on, maybe 3, I guess. The King's Landing stuff, the Essos stuff, and the Wall stuff. But there's so many adventures that branch out from here, and just that feeling at the end of the episode, it's a good feeling to know like you have so much in store.
So we also get Arya's plot line here is actually borrowed from book 2. Because in book 1, this stuff with the setup with Yoren and like Gendry being there and all that's like the start of book 2. That doesn't happen here. So it's interesting to see that they drew that into here. Why do you think they did that?
I think to set up her adventure. I think that just having her story end where it was in the book is kind of leaving her on a cliffhanger. And if they ended the first season with everybody clearly having a path that they were going to head down, I think it would get people more invested to come back next season. Yeah,
the true cliffhanger they leave us on is Dany. Which are we ready to get in that one? Or do you have any other? Oh, let's talk about Joffrey and Sansa. So it's a Joffrey, such a Joffrey moment. I'm going to bring you out to the wall and make you look at your father's head. And then I love Sansa saying like, because he says I'm gonna give you your brother's head, and she says like maybe he'll give me yours, and we want to see that so bad, right? But that's not how it goes down. Game of Thrones does not give that to us, does not give us the satisfaction. And then, I just love like how they brought that moment from the book where she almost pushes him off, and then the moment passes and she doesn't quite get it in time. I'm really happy that small moment was still brought to the screen, because I think it's a cool one to see her like. Sansa has to go through a lot of growth here, and this is like the start of her learning to like fight back a little bit, I guess, is her at least thinking about doing that.
Well, we can see the fight in her, and I think that's like the Stark, and she needed that moment in terms of everything she goes through and she's going to go through. That was definitely a big, even though it was only a couple seconds, that was huge.
Yeah. Well, and like I also think about how like Arya had someone in Yoren have her not look. But like Sansa like watched Ned's head get cut off and feels like it was her fault in like a large part.
Yeah.
So that's got to be really brutal. And she's not much older than Arya, you know. So it's not like she was equipped to handle this well. So I don't know. I feel like I have a lot more sympathy for Sansa now, whereas I remember early on, like not being as big a fan of her because of a lot of the like. I mean, we see her being kind of terrible in a lot of these early episodes, and not not appreciating her family enough, and being way too on board with Joffrey and all that.
I mean, I felt it's not quite. I definitely wasn't as on board with Sansa as I was with Catelyn, but I said before, like Catelyn was a character that I had to eventually come around to going back and appreciating her character more each time. I feel like Sansa's the same way. I like her more now than especially when I first started the show, because it seemed to me throughout she sold her family out to the Lannisters repeatedly, and I wasn't there for that, but I understand a little more now, and I think that I'm already, just having watched the first season, I'm already pulling for Sansa, and that moment where she almost kills Joffrey is a big one.
Yeah, that's a big reason why, I think. Because that makes us feel for her in a way that I think we could, like, if you just left it at the Baelor stuff, like, I think we'd be more mad at her heading into the next season.
In the book, there are a couple of things that I had written out here. We get the story of the Children of the Forest and the first men in the Andals being told to Bran, I believe. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's huge for the lore, and like that being left out of the show, you know, changes things for later seasons. They have to do more explaining later. But another one was we get Podrick as Tyrion's squire in this first one, which in the show we don't get till much later. Yeah. Season 2, I think, or maybe even 3. I think 2. Yeah. And this is in both show and book, but I wanted to talk about Rickon and Feral Shaggy Dog down in the crypt at the beginning of this episode, where in the book I think he even attacks the Maester, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think
Shaggy Dog and Summer has to jump in and save the day.
It's like Osha or whatever in the show instead.
Yeah, and Rickon and Bran seem to have green sight. At least maybe there's something to do with like a younger, because Rickon's so young, he has like this dream that Bran shares where they see Ned in the crypt before he like right as he dies.
I really like, we don't get to see that dream, but the implication being that it actually was Ned or some sort of premonition. That's like it gives me chills kind of moment, which was cool. It's always cool to have that in a show. Yeah, well, I like that.
Maybe it lends some sort of support to the warging theory that maybe he was traveling through some sort of green.
There are people who believe that Ned Stark is still alive somehow, and that he's going to make a return in the final season. I don't see it, but yeah, I mean, here's some of the reasons why I think you're right. We see supernatural shit going down.
So, I mean, we've never seen a headless white. I guess maybe we have seen a headless white. So do we see Ned Stark's body come back as a white?
I don't know how that would happen. He's got to be a skeleton. He's got to be a skeleton by now. Although we've seen some skeletons. But let's get into another big prophecy here. I think to set up is the Khal Drogo prophecy from Mazdul, who says that because Dany says when will he be normal again or whatever, and she says when the sun rises in the west and sets in the east and the mountains blow away like leaves or something like that. And that's when he'll be back, essentially. I don't have the exact words in front of me, but this there's a little more to it too, because in the book it's also when your womb quickens again or something, because she's and like you have another child, which isn't a big part of the show, but in the book that is a big thing, that she doesn't think she's able to have any more children, and then at some point she does start getting like her menstrual cycle again, and so it's implied that maybe she can have children again. And so in the book, you could argue that a lot of the things of this prophecy have come true, because in the book there's a character, I think his name's called Quentin Martell, and he in House Martell is the sun, has the sun as their emblem, and he in the books leaves from the west, heads east, and then dies. He gets killed by Dany's dragons in the where they're locked up, because he tries to like unchain them. And so you could argue that he is the sun that rises in the west and sets in the east. And then the final piece of the prophecy is the mountains getting turned to grass or whatever, and people have, or leaves or whatever. And people have argued that that's like the death of the mountain, Sir Gregor Clegane. And that when that happens, we'll see the return of Khal Drogo. so that's my question to you is like, are we going to see the return of Khal Drogo?
My thing is like I've always felt that like Khal Drogo reincarnate is Drogon, the dragon.
Yes.
So maybe it just means that like maybe Drogon will be at his most powerful when all of the prophecies have come completed or something, and maybe like Khal Drogo will be himself again through Drogon. But I don't know. I mean, maybe in the book, I don't think physically seeing Khal Drogo rise from the grave and be the warrior he was before, I don't really see that happening.
I agree. I think a way that this could be fulfilled in both book and show is that Dany and Jon could have a child together, and she could name that child Drogo.
That'd be cool.
Thus fulfilling the prophecy.
Yeah.
So maybe. I don't know if that'll happen, but yeah, that's like the one way I can see this prophecy coming true. But I do agree with you about like I've always kind of felt like Drogon is sort of Khal Drogo reincarnated too. So I don't know. So yeah, that leads into this final scene there though here, and we get her baby's dead, and it's gonna have this final funeral pyre for Drogo. She ties the witch to it, and she walks in, and we get the whole unburnt scene and the ending here. And this is another absolutely iconic scene, right? Like from the book, and put to screen, and man, is it cool. And I think it's a great way to end the season here.
That was a huge ending, just absolutely insane. If you were a casual viewer and you hadn't really put the pieces all the way together, when she's putting the eggs in the fire, like that's your signal, that's your time to be like, okay, we're gonna get some dragons here. But even just like, even if you saw it coming a little bit, when she's got the dragons on her and they're just kind of pulling out and showing all the Dothraki kneeling to her, you're like, okay, she is now full on Khaleesi. She's going to lead people forever. The dragons are going to grow. We're going to see massive dragons in the show, and we're going to see Dany take the Seven Kingdoms.
Yeah, really, really cool. And she is the mother of dragons here, and like literally, instead of giving birth to her son with Khal Drogo, she essentially gives birth to dragons here, right? And it's so cool how we kind of change. It's like all the stuff about the stallion who mounts the world. Like I always felt like that was also Drogon too, right? Like her giving birth to Drogon, the dragon, is like he is like that prophecy when if you apply it to her dragon, right? It is actually still kind of true, and that he is this ultra warrior who's going to like lay waste to the world, and Drogon is that, right? in dragon form.
Right. Do you think we see the end of dragons again at the end of the show?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I don't know, and what's Martin playing at? It's tough to say, and I think that's the big question is like, where is this all headed? And I can guarantee you that no matter where it is headed, it's not going to satisfy everybody. Be prepared to be dissatisfied, everybody, because it's going to happen. This is too big a show. There's too many different things going on. Like, it's just impossible to satisfy everyone. And even shows, to me, that in my opinion, that have great endings like Breaking Bad, in my opinion, has a brilliant ending, masterfully done. There are still people who were dissatisfied by that ending. I remember it when it came out, people complaining about it.
Yeah. It's the nature of endings. There's no more after that. So you're
right.
gonna, like, even if it's not necessarily, even if you do like the ending, there's people who are going to be bummed out because it's over and there's no other details. There's nothing else to come. So I don't know. I think that you try to take it with a grain of salt and realize, like, if you hate the show ending, then hold out hope for that last book. Hope that those books are great.
Which I know I will be. Even if I like the show ending, I'm going to be holding up for those last books. We haven't talked about it much, I don't think, in our coverage, but I believe Martin's going to write the books. I think we're going to get Winds of Winter at some point in the next probably 1 to 2 years, and then the hope is that the final book will actually get delivered. And a lot of people are very pessimistic about it and think he's going to die before he's able to finish it, which is a very dark thing to say, but a lot of people say it. I I don't know. I want to believe in the man. I want to believe that he'll get it done, and that maybe the show ending will like lift some pressure off of him, and he'll actually be able to do it. That's my hope.
I think he's going to do it. I agree. It's coming out. He's going to drop both books. I think that at this point, you wait for the hype to hit for the show, wait for stuff to die down a little bit, maybe release it the following year. And then, I have to hold out hope. I know it's kind of a fool's dream, maybe, but I have to hold up. Maybe like a year or two later, we get the final book, but I'm sure it'll be longer than that. But I'm willing to wait personally. Like I'm here to wait. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, honestly, that's the thing. I don't care how long it takes. Like, I'd prefer it sooner, but I have so many other things I can read. It's not like I'm hurting for good books to read, you know? So, like, when it comes out, I'll be happy when I get it.
Yeah. Exactly.
And that's an unpopular opinion. I know a lot of people do not agree with that. A lot of people, like, want it. They feel like they're invested, and there's this promise, and that there are things owed to them as readers. And I get a lot of that feeling. I just don't share it. I think, to me, there's too many good things being written right now. There's too many great series and shows and books out there that I will be fine waiting. And I would rather have a great book than a rushed book, too. So I'd rather it take 5 or 6 years or more, as long as I get it, which is what I do want. As long as it eventually comes out, I will be happy with it. And if it's good, I mean, obviously, if he writes a terrible book, he writes a terrible book. But, assuming that doesn't happen, which, who knows? A lot of people think he's kind of lost it, too, because you could argue that book 4 and 5 are the weakest in the series. But I don't know, man. I think Winds of Winter is going to be a good book. I think it's going to be, maybe even a great book when it comes out. I really do. So I still have hope, and I still believe in Martin.
Yep.
I'm a Martin loyalist.
Yeah, and honestly, at the end of the day, if you are bummed out by the end of the show as well, and you're one of those people who are not holding out for the book and you're not invested in the book, there's a bunch of spin-offs, and you're not going to be able to escape Westeros eventually. So wait for the spin-offs. I'm sure they won't be nearly as good as the original show, but if you need that extra fix, it'll be there, and let's hope they're good shows and maybe even great shows.
Yeah. All right, man. I think we've come to the end of our Game of Thrones coverage. I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I got to go through this with you, and I feel like we've really dived into this material that I really love, and in a way that I'm excited that we got to do, because I never feel like I know something as well as I do until after we cover it.
Yeah.
Because we really just research it.
That's why I feel like I don't see a world where we don't cover the books. But again, it'll be a massive, the other books and other series of the show, massive undertaking. So I would like to think in the future we get to it. But if this is it, I'm happy that we were able to cover it, and I think we did a pretty good job. And I liked how we were able to tackle it with the knowledge that we have this far along in the show and in the books. Yeah.
And I hope you all enjoyed it too. And please do return with us next week when we start into our Pet Sematary coverage. If you like Game of Thrones, you're probably going to like Stephen King. A lot of the more just like dark stuff and crazy content. And we've always enjoyed covering King. So hopefully you'll come back with us next week. And I did really want to thank JV, who is a patron of ours, who is helping support this podcast and keep it going. If you wanted to learn how to become a patron yourself, go to patreon.com/ink2film, and you can learn how to get access to all of our bonus content, which we're going to be putting out another episode this month. I think there's like 11 or 12 of them now.
Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at ink2film, and join our Facebook group, Council of Inklings, where we post polls for potential bonus episodes or maybe even projects for the show proper.
Yeah, and leave us a rating and a review. If you appreciate the show at all, we'd love to hear from you, and that's the best way to let us know, is to publicly give us a shout out in the form of a rating review. iTunes, Stitcher, on Facebook itself, wherever you want to leave it, we'd love to have it.
We'd like to thank Jennifer De Lozana for providing our transcripts, and thank you to Ramsey B for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, man, I'm going to finish off this Amma Gang. I think I'll post a picture of it to our Instagram. You can all check it out. But cheers to you. Cheers to all of you for listening. Thanks for joining us for all of this. And until next time.
Valar Morghulis.